Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're diving into a truly fascinating and honestly deeply unsettling explainer. We're breaking down a piece of source material that absolutely captures the terrifying isolation of working the graveyard shift. We're talking about a timeline, an incredibly creepy environment, and the psychological escalation of a normal night that spirals completely out of control. It's basically a chronological mystery tracking a hospital security guard whose mundane evening turns into an absolute nightmare. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's unravel this mystery step by step.
Okay, to really get this, we need to put ourselves directly in the shoes of our narrator. And they put it perfectly. It's never fun working on the day before Christmas, especially night shifts. Think about it. Everyone else is at home, cozy, opening presents. But for this isolated security guard, it's just another shift. The hospital is basically a ghost town running on a skeleton crew. And the goal here is something we can all relate to. Just get through the night, enjoy the peace and quiet, and whatever you do, avoid unnecessary trouble.
The night actually starts out pretty normally. At hour in, the guard clocks on. 2 hours in, they verify that the main service elevator is completely out of order. A detail that actually kind of seems minor right now, but definitely keep that in your back pocket. Then, around hour 3, we see the routine setting in. As they patrol, the guard deliberately avoids one specific camera blind spot at the far end of the corridor, the morgue. And hey, it's a very human reaction, right? They figure even the dead deserve some privacy, but honestly, they just don't want to go anywhere near the place.
Now, you really have to understand the psychological pressure cooker this guard is operating in. Look, security had just been outsourced to another company that now owns all the cameras. The hospital staff itself just suffered a massive round of downsizing, so the guard is literally terrified their job is next on the chopping block. Because of all this pressure, our narrator is highly motivated to just smile for those cameras, look super busy, and completely ignore anything that falls outside their immediate job description. They are absolutely choosing the path of least resistance here.
Section 1. The anomalies. Out-of-place elements disrupt the quiet.
But as you might guess, that path of least resistance, it doesn't last long. These seemingly small, completely disconnected events start stacking up. First, the guard finds a handful of kids' drawings just abandoned on a seat in the waiting area. Kind of weird, right? Almost a morbid reminder of how people cope with hospitals and death. Then the silence is broken by a phantom cell phone ringtone echoing down the empty hall. Naturally, the guard assumes it's just a misplaced phone in the belongings storage room. But then comes the real kicker, the terrifying realization that when they check that storage room, the ringing isn't coming from inside.
To understand why this is such a big deal, we have to look at the hospital's actual rulebook. The official morgue protocol strictly requires that all cell phones belonging to the deceased be turned off or silenced the exact moment they arrive. So a ringing phone in the designated storage area, actually a pretty common occurrence. Someone just forgot to flip the switch. But when the ringing isn't in that storage room, well, that becomes a chilling violation of the rules. It means a phone is somewhere it absolutely should not be.
So the guard hurries back down the corridor as the ringing starts up again. They bypass the storage room. They follow the echo. They track the sound all the way down that long, dark hallway until they reach the absolute end of the line. Which really begs the question, where was that ringing actually coming from?
Yup, it was coming from the exact place the guard had been actively avoiding all night, the morgue itself. The narrator describes standing there basically paralyzed by this morbid reality that someone, somewhere, was actively trying to call the dead. But when they finally gather enough courage to take a quick, super hesitant peek through the small windows on the morgue doors, nothing. The room was dark. A glimpse inside revealed absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. And then the ringing just stopped.
Section 2. The escalation. An unexpected call changes everything.
So, the guard practically sprints back to the safety of the office, incredibly relieved to be away from the morgue and totally willing to write the whole thing off as a creepy fluke. But then, out of nowhere, the phone rings. Not a phantom cell phone, the actual security desk phone. It's Max, the guy from the outsourced security firm watching the cameras remotely. He says, "Hey, we noticed a van in the parking lot. Probably belongs to the elevator repair guy." He asks our guard to go get an update on that broken service elevator. This is a massive shock. I mean, the previous shift had mentioned absolutely nothing about a repairman coming in the dead of night on Christmas Eve. It completely blindsides our narrator.
Section 3. The discovery. Investigating the physical anomalies.
Driven by the very real fear of being fired, the guard knows they can't just ignore this request, so they grab a heavy flashlight and leave the completely false safety of that security office to go find this supposed repairman. They start walking down that same dark corridor once more. But this time, as they reach the end near the broken elevator in the morgue, something changes. There's a sudden, totally unnatural drop in temperature. It literally feels physically colder than it did just an hour prior. The guard raises their flashlight, illuminates the dark hallway, and the beam hits the morgue doors. Now normally, you'd expect a morgue to be locked down tight. Heavy doors closed, bodies secured, totally undisturbed. Exactly how it looked when the guard peeked through the window earlier. But the reality staring back at them was entirely different. Those heavy morgue doors were now standing wide open. And it gets worse. Looking inside, one of the corpse racks had been pulled out and left entirely open. Let that sink in. An open rack means someone, or something, had just been inside.
And right while the guard is frozen in pure terror, just staring at this empty corpse rack, it happens again. The ringing. That exact same cell phone ringtone returns, but this time, it's not coming from inside the morgue. The sound is originating right next to the guard, over by the out-of-order service elevator. As the guard slowly, agonizingly turns around and approaches the elevator shaft, the ringing gets significantly louder.
Section 4. The chilling conclusion. A gruesome discovery.
The guard aims their flashlight away from the morgue and points it directly toward the source of the ringing at the elevator doors. And the very first thing the narrator's brain registers, it isn't a person, it isn't a phone, it is simply an unbelievable volume of blood. The source material heavily emphasizes this overwhelming sensory shock. It's a scene so horrific and jarring that it immediately makes the guard sick to their stomach, a visual that haunts them long after the shift ends.
The flashlight beam finally cuts through the darkness to reveal the grisly reality. The missing repairman had suffered a catastrophic fall down the shaft. He'd been severed in half by the sharp, rusty cables of the broken elevator. It was his cell phone ringing this whole time, echoing all the way up from the darkness of the shaft, as someone desperately tried to reach him. It wasn't a ghost making a call. It was a devastating, lethal workplace accident.
But you see, the horror doesn't actually stop with the physical trauma. When first responders finally arrived to recover the body, they discovered a harrowing fact, a detail deliberately kept from the public. When they reached the mangled corpse at the bottom of that shaft, the repairman's face was contorted into a grimace of pure horror and dread. It wasn't just the shock of a sudden fall. That expression, it suggested he saw something utterly terrifying in his final moments.
And here is where this masterfully structured narrative totally closes the loop. It's a three-part sequence. First, the gruesome elevator accident occurs. Then, first responders recover the repairman's corpse. And finally, the hospital staff processes the new arrival. They place the repairman into a storage rack in the morgue. But here's the twist. The rack they use? It is the exact same corpse rack that guard had found inexplicably pulled open before the accident was even discovered.
Knowing that completely changes how we view the timeline of the entire night, doesn't it? Suddenly, those seemingly innocent kids' drawings about death in the waiting area are inextricably linked to the brutal reality of the repairman's fate. Connecting them is that open morgue door and the waiting rack. Those isolated anomalies from the start of the shift, they weren't random. The open rack wasn't a break-in, it was a premonition. The morgue was actively preparing for a new arrival before the man was even dead.
As the guard notes, if it were all just a tragic accident, they could have eventually lived with it. But the open rack and the drawings, they form a much, much darker picture. Which brings us to the provocative question this explainer leaves us with. Does death have a master plan for us all? Was this just a series of incredibly morbid coincidences, or a true ghost story where the morgue itself was anticipating its next guest? I'll let you decide for yourself. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I will see you in the next one.